Welcome to Lead Poison.
Welcome to another episode of the Lead Poison podcast brought to you by youcanpaint.com.au. Please head to youcanpaint.com.au for issue 1 of their how-to series, How to Paint Your House and Save Thousands. My name is Jack, your host, and today I am delighted to say I will be joined by Morgan Lewis, otherwise known as Morganics. Morgan has a diverse and storied history within not only the hip-hop culture, but performing arts as well. He is a spoken word poet, an award-winning filmmaker, MC, breakdancer, beatboxer, a playwright, and of course a music producer. Morgan has spent decades travelling to indigenous communities here in Australia and across the globe, recording songs with people both young and old. And like many of the pioneers who have led the way from the 1980s, Morgan is dedicated to giving back to the community. His efforts are far-reaching and continuous, and as both a person and an artist, Morgan is someone we as Australians can be extremely proud of. There is nothing but nice things to say about Morgan, but just like any good artist, Morgan stays humble, disciplined, dedicated, and approaches creativity as a servant, a characteristic any aspiring artist should strive to achieve. I really enjoyed our discussion, and I hope you do as well. Please welcome Morgan Lewis. So Morgan, bro, for me, it's actually a really special treat to talk to you. I've known about you since my early days in Sydney. We've got a mutual friend, LC Beats. On a few occasions, we've shared a cypher at various shows, out the front of shows, and crossed paths here and there. But I've always been interested in your perspective in regards to the culture and everything you've been doing. You know, having been heavily involved in hip hop from what I can gather since the early 80s. And you've been really active since then. It's pretty impressive what you've been able to achieve. I guess the first thing I want to ask is how that sort of work ethic culminated in 2015 when you released Survival Tactics. For those that don't know, Survival Tactics is Australia's first hip hop feature film. I watched it again the other night and I really enjoyed it. It's a really good watch, man. So I recommend that the link will be in the show notes for everyone that wants to go check it out. But tell me, I imagine it was logistically pretty hard to make a movie. Tell me a little bit about the process of how that began.
Yeah, well, first shouts to LC, your mate, of course. And of course, I do remember us ciphering and hanging out, of course, man. And sort of doesn't surprise me, perhaps, when I first met LC, I got a sense that he was someone who was coming into hip hop, obviously a lot younger than myself, but he was really hungry for the knowledge of local hip hop, as well as for him French hip hop, and that so it doesn't surprise me that you've spoken to legends such as Mystery and Exit, who are my forebears, people that I came up under, and so props to you for connecting those dots, and it's a pleasure to be as part of that. And it's not really. Mystery does a whole animation sequence in Survival Tactics. LC is in the film. In a train cipher scenes. Exit would have been if he was in Sydney. That the film really was a culmination and an homage to the different communities that I've worked with in my life in Sydney, and so I really wanted to try and do something which shone a light on all those diverse communities. So that was, of course, hip hop and the massive diversity within that. But also I've worked a bit with disabled communities, refugee communities, and indigenous communities. And those communities were all integral to the film itself as well, and very intentionally involved from the get-go. So then getting it and making it all happen, well, it really just happened overnight. And it was a 5-year night. It was a long bloody journey, man. And it wouldn't have happened if there weren't a few people, particularly my DOP, Ming, who is actually a DJ, DJ Ming. He sort of was the one who early on was sort of crazy enough to say, man, you should make a film, you should make a feature film. And him having the technology and the equipment and the enthusiasm and the passion made me think, wow, if he thinks I and we, being the people involved in the original, what it was, the hip hop theatre show, could turn it into a feature film, then I thought, well, maybe we can. I could rave on for many, many hours about it, but I would say that it was 160 people, when over 160 people were involved in it, and I owe them all so much because, we just did it on a really simple standard base pay rate. Everyone got paid the same. We fed people. That's what we could do. And people came up and worked so hard. And, it ended up being a 4-week shoot, 1 year of editing, back for another week of pickup shots, another 1.5 years of post-production. I did all the grading, all the color grading, took about 2 months. I did all the sound mixing and sound design, which took about 3 months. That's what you do when you can't afford to pay someone else to do it. And it was a learning circle that was so steep. It was learning circle. There you go. It was the learning circle. I just went up and around and around and around. I figured out a million ways how not to make a film. But we did it, and it was only through all those different communities and the hip hop community element, crosswords, the hip hop church. There's one scene we shot out there. It's a very good example. People who I've looked up to and grown up under were kind enough to be involved in it. People like Mystery. They were just, yeah, it was great. It was great. There's a lot of cameos in the film. It's a really good one to watch.
Yeah, there is. And of course, you had tried your hand at acting as well, but I know you've done a lot of performance in the past, but how did you go sort of playing that character and doing that as well as handling all the other sides of the business?
Yeah, it was pretty intense. My character Fury was modeled a lot on work I'd done in Western Sydney with a woman called Alicia Talbot. She's working with, and I was working with Brother Black as well. And we were working on a show that was created with young homeless people out of High Street Youth Health Service. And I developed a character in conjunction with the young people. And then that character sort of fed into and was developed along the way. And eventually, I'd say with the lineage that led to my character called Fury, who's a young homeless guy who's, had a tough background. Of abuse as a young boy, and then ends up living on the streets, and then he loves his hip hop totally, but gets on the ice. And we made that film a long time ago, but ice was hitting like a wrecking ball. Everyone we knew around the place, so we wanted to address it head on, and that was really what his character was. So I lost 7 kilos. I didn't really have 7 kilos to lose, but I did. And got into the mode of this crazy, frenetic, horrible, sad clown headspace, which he is really. So it was, well, I won't lie, when we stopped shooting, I was really, really relieved, because it sort of gets under your skin a little bit. And it's ultimately a bit of a sad, tragic story, the film, and quite real, quite close to a lot of it. Was very close to a lot of us. So it was a relief to get it done. It was a lot of fun, and a lot of times it's great.
How was the response, from the general public and maybe other people in that industry once you had released it? Is it still getting much traction? Is there anything happening, that happened after you finished recording and you released it, or is it kind of just done and dusted now and it's out in the universe?
Well, when it started, before we started, I said, look, my mission is I want this to be seen by 20,000 people, because we were going to tour it to England. We'd done it as a hip hop theatre show at the Sydney Opera House and Brisbane Powerhouse and Melbourne Arts House, and we took it up to Queensland as further up. So we were on the cusp of taking the whole crew to England to do it, And then at that stage, DSLR cameras were just blowing everyone's minds with their capabilities. And in conjunction with this DOP, our director of photography, Ning, he said, you could shoot it on these DSLRs. And I was like, wow. So it was one of the first films, if not the first, I'm not sure, but he reckons it may have been the first feature film shot in Australia just on DSLRs, so Canon 7Ds. We had 3 of them. We were shooting with 3 cameras on every shot. And basically it just meant that budget-wise, we could sort of do it. And I sort of, just crunched the maths of how much it would cost to get us to England and all the funding and what it would cost, how many people would see us there, for a whole tour and da-da-da-da. And I was like, well, let's make a film. And if 20,000 people see this, that's going to be probably 15,000 more people than would have seen it if we'd spent the same amount of money to tour it. And so putting it on YouTube after it came out, after we'd done a whole lot of screenings around the country, were all great. A shout out to Thorn, who did a really great screening at Redfern Community Centre.
Shout out to Thorn. Yeah,
always. And when it went on YouTube, now it's sort of just got its own life and it's picking up hits all the time and all around the world. So, it's not Justin Bieber or Kid Laroi, but, it's not Justin Bieber or Kid Laroi. So I'm happy. Sorry, that was a diss, but that was a diss, I mean, look, it's not, I don't make shit for the mainstream. It's not a mainstream film. It's, but it has over 80,000 people have watched the film, which I'm really, it's fantastic. And that's all, and it will keep growing. It'll keep going on YouTube. So, I'm really happy with that. I'm stoked, really stoked.
Well, even though it's I mean, what is that? 6 years ago, I watched it the other night, and it's, it's very much relevant to today's day and age. I mean, 6 years isn't too long, but it's, it could have been made last year for all I knew when I watched it. So it's still very relevant, I think.
Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, that's good. It's interesting. We were actually a bit sort of like, we're going to touch on this ice thing, because it took about 5 years to get it done. So it came out. So, the germination was, probably 12 years back it started. And when it was finally done, it was like, well, it's sort of good and sort of sad that is still relevant.
Yeah, I was going to say that's still very much a problem across Australia.
Bittersweet.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. I thought YRMC is the fella that's sort of one of the main characters, isn't he?
He's the hero. He's the lead.
Yeah, he was fantastic. Really, really got a knack for, that type of screen work and everything like that. I thought his character was really good. And of course, Demolition B-Girl as well, fantastic. And as you said, it's got a bit of a who's who throughout the whole movie. It's just, I was watching, there's that bloke and there's this guy, and it was really cool just to see everyone getting involved. I loved it.
Yeah, there's so many B-boys and B-girls and
yeah, man,
graph writers and DJs and spoken word artists and parkour dudes, and it's just we really were blessed. And for me, it's just a showcase of Sydney can be a bit of a commercial city in a lot of ways, but there is a really strong, at least at that time when I was there was a really strong, fantastic, vital, super talented, dope, fresh, funky mix of people from all around the planet doing some crazy shit, which it doesn't really get credit for sometimes. Do you feel? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, man. Obviously at the moment with the pandemic, it's hard to tell what's going on in terms of creativity and arts in the city, but I think it's still smouldering in the background. I think there's some good things to come for Sydney and a lot of the major cities in Australia. But sort of speaking of location, I know you were born in Brisbane. You spent a lot of time in Sydney and Melbourne, and you've travelled the world. But these days you're living in Cairns. And correct me if I'm wrong. You've got a baby on the scene at the moment.
Yeah, I've got a daughter. She's 4, going on 14, and she was busting some beatboxers, a little fella in the pool the other day. He said, I beatbox. And I went, Kaya, go for it. And they had a little jam. So yeah, she's great.
what's I mean, I've never been to Cairns, but what's Cairns like at the moment with the pandemic and everything like that? Has it sort of hit the area?
Oh, we're very, very lucky, and I don't like to, I don't want to in any way brag about it because I know how real lockdown is for so many people. But so with that in mind, I will say that we have been very, very fortunate in Cairns. There's only really been, we had a 3-day lockdown a while ago. We wore masks for a while. Having said that, the trickle-down effect in terms of what is a very tourist-based town, seems almost a third of the population will be international a lot of the year because of the barrier reef primarily. And that means employment for so many people, just normal people doing all sorts of things like laundry. I had a job cleaning Airbnb apartments, for a little bit here, which, that's part of the industry of the world, all gone. So, it's definitely still had an effect up here, but in the day-to-day life, we are very blessed. We are able to be out and about and to do a lot of things. And people are jumping on. We've got vaccination hubs pumping and at the moment, and people are really going for it, which is great. That's the only way out, I suppose. So go for it.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to sort of getting sort of back to some sort of normality in a way. But I imagine you're probably planning on some travel once you can. Are you looking forward to traveling overseas anytime soon?
Not really on the cards, actually. No. I mean, it feels like Sydney is overseas. Like my mum and my sister are down there, and they're probably my priority. It's been very tough for them, as I'm sure you can attest to, and anyone in Sydney or anyone in lockdown can attest to. So, I'd probably be just as excited to see. My priority is probably family, wherever they are. I just want to hang out with them and get overseas when the time is right. That'd be wonderful too. Seems so far away, doesn't it?
Yeah. So Morgan, let me take you back a little bit, just to sort of your earlier years. Where did you, and I guess just speaking of hip hop, I know you're involved in a lot of other things as well, but speaking of hip hop particularly, where did you first find your interest in rapping and breakdancing and beatboxing? Was that in Brisbane or in Sydney?
Yeah, well, I mean, I left Brisbane when I was 5, so if I was doing it then, I would have been ahead of the curve. even
your daughter is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I would have been doing it probably about the time when hip hop was actually starting in the damn Bronx. It's my age because I'm 50 now. So, it was really when I was 11 in Sydney, and I have a very I did mime and acting. I wanted to be Charlie Chaplin when I was a kid. I used to go and watch his films and walk home pretending to be Charlie Chaplin. And I was lucky enough to do mime with a guy I could mark for no, who was a French mime artist, and we did mime shows. And then what Molly Meldon called rap dancing, so I called it rap dancing, hit. And I was like, damn, I can use all my mime. And I really just got in. That was it. That's what hooked me. And it just, I think people, young men all around the world, all around the planet, in the early 80s, it just bang hit, and it just blew my mind. Just totally blew my mind. And that was it. That's what got me hooked. And I would go down to Hoyt's outside the cinema on George Street in Sydney, and I had my own little booth. You had to make your own things, so I'd go to Paddy's Markets and I'd get the Odyssey jeans, and I'd get the Nike canvas high top red swoosh boots were the one thing that was sort of identifiably standardly hip hop. But then you go to the chemist and you buy the white gloves to do the mime routines, and then go to the hardware store and get the linoleum and get the lino. It was a real do-it-yourself culture, and it was also a sense of like, it was on the precipice. Is this going to continue? Will this last? And all different people were talking about that. I remember early on, will this last for very long? No one really knew. And it was quite punk. in that sense of punk, of like people, you just made it happen. You know, there was one breakdancing school in Sydney. But then I started teaching when I was like 11. So, you know, I'd catch the train down the coast and go to Woy Woy squash courts, and kids would come in stinking of the glue that they'd been sniffing, and I'd say, okay, let's dance to Shaka Khan, Ain't Nobody. And and that's how I started teaching, you know, and probably hasn't changed too much these days.
Yeah, maybe not.
The
maybe in some areas. So there was some doubt, because Mystery had some interesting points about those early days and hip hop, and sort of the doubt behind whether or not it was, you know, some people considered it to be sort of fad in a lot of ways. And I think in some ways it might have been, but, you know, it's just activities for kids really. But was there some doubt that, I mean, you just mentioned that, but there was some doubt that it wouldn't sort of continue on and become what it has become today? And did you always think that you would be involved, you know, once you found it, or did you have a little bit of doubt yourself?
I think when you're really young, like when I was first doing it, 11, 12, 13 particularly, I still remember the moment there was an American exchange student. Of course, it was before the internet, and we had this guy called Randy, and he was a good mate of mine, and we would rap dance together. And he went back to America for school holidays. Then I remember sitting on the back of the bus, and I can remember exactly where we were when he said to me, okay, I was asking him, how was your trip? How was it? What's happening in America? And he said, there's this song that's come out, and there are robots dancing, and it's science fiction, and it's jazz, and someone's got a record and they move it backward and forth and it makes a sound. And I was like, what the fuck? And he got off the bus, and I said, whatever that shit is, when I hear it, it's going to change my life. That is it. I don't know what that is. That's like, I don't know what, Herbie Hancock's Rocket.
Right, of course.
And yeah, lo and behold, man, I heard that song and that was it. It was over. Everything you knew was irrelevant. Everything else you thought of, just forget about it. Just, I don't know, we became hip hop zombies, you know, and it happened all around the world. It's beautiful. I've you know, been lucky enough to be to, you know, different places where you chat to other people of a similar age, and they'll tell you similar stories of just these hordes of young dudes, you know, going around the streets to bust out and, you know, do their little beat street, their little breakdance, you know. And
they're really powerful sort of experiences. Those first couple of experiences when you're young, you know, in regards to hip hop, they're so moving and energetic. They can keep you going for years and years, and then, you know, before you know it, you're done. You're involved, and you just want to keep going.
Before you know it, you're doing a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Good on you, man. That's it. You know, that's it. You know, it's. I did an interview last week with a young fella, and it was hooked up by Kamikaze, who was an old student of mine. Respect, super king from the Juice Crew. Taught him in Wetherill Park when he was a little man. Now he's Vin Diesel. He's just enormously huge and strong and great. And he'd gotten one of his students to interview me. There's like 3 generations for the Street University. There's like 3 generations of hip hop happening there, you know, and that's, oh God, when I was teaching him, I never would have thought something like that would happen, but it happens. And, you know, people that were your students become your employer, and that's just, you know, you're doing incredible work. Good on you. That's great.
You know, touching on hip hop, of course, Bubba Israel, Elf Transporter, and yourself, you came together in the late 90s and formed Metabase and Breath. Tell me a little bit about how that came about. How did you get involved with those 2 guys and end up forming the group?
Yeah, so I was at art school, University of New South Wales College of Fine Arts, where LC Beats went, and he went later. And Elf Transporter and I were studying together, and we would go out busking. He was a fantastic tabla player. Elf was born in LA, grew up in Houston and Chicago, and fantastic tabla player. And I was playing Darumbuka and a bit of djembe, and we would hit Oxford Street. And I was sort of introducing him to Public Enemy and hip hop. Even though he's from America, he was more from an industrial music sound, experimental music scene. And he was opening himself up to what he considered to be mainstream American hip hop, the mainstream American culture. And we were connecting and are still connected, excuse me, to this day. And we were busking. Then I got a job directing a project called Hip Hopera in 1995 for Urban Theatre Projects, which was down at the Powerhouse in Liverpool, which they just converted into an arts venue. And it was a very lucky gig. And we had worked with about, I don't know, 150 young people all around southwest Sydney, including juvenile jail, and had a bunch of different hip hop artists and filmmakers and choreographers to create these big multimedia hip hop spectaculars that we did in Sydney under the Harbour Bridge at Sydney Dance Company and at the Powerhouse. And we had live video stuff and fireworks and Arabic belly dancing and just anything and everything. And part of that, a dude rocked up and people said to me, there's a guy coming. He came here last week. He's from New York. His name is Bubba and he wants to do the workshops. I was like, okay, cool. Bubba from New York. All right. He can be one of the people in the show. And so then I see him and this guy rocks up and he's like in full hippie clothes, big red beard and a didgeridoo. He goes, hey man, I'm Bubba. And I went, right. Wasn't what I expected. But bang, as soon as we met, we just vibed and we had to drive back into Sydney and we were in a truck together, driving back in the company truck, and we just freestyled all the way back into Sydney from Liverpool. And then I knew Elf was, and then we jumped out of the truck and just stood in front of the Queen Victoria building and just bust straight away. Started rapping and I was breakdancing and he was popping and we just went crazy. And then I think that night we caught up with Elf. I said, you've got to meet this other American dude, Elf, my good mate. And so we met and we started busking on Oxford Street. And, you know, we were drumming, we was playing dig, I was dancing, and that's it. That's how it started. And then other people joined the crew.
Wow, that's really interesting. Speaking of, you know, busking, when I first moved to Sydney, sort of, I would have been about 10, busking was huge, wasn't it? I mean, you'd go into the city and there'd be so many street performers and things like that. Has that, I don't know if you know much about it, but has that scene sort of, you know, is there some sort of legalities there that stop that happening?
I think they call it the living city in Sydney, which is one of my favourite council mottos, which means you can't do anything unless it's paid as part of the Crown Casino.
Bit of an oxymoron, I think.
Yeah, bloody earth, that's right. So, yeah, you have to have a busking license these days. And Oxford Street is not what it was. We used to help fund our, you know, my time through art school was really partly funded by busking every Friday and Saturday night on Oxford Street because it was not so, you know, and fantastic and vibrant and diverse and crazy and mixed. And Sydney was so many different identities and sexualities and politics and ideas all cruising up and down the street together and having a ball together. It was fantastic. Yeah, but I think Sydney has not had a good trot when it comes to the arts.
Yeah, I think you might be right there. But so it sounds like Metabase and Breath was sort of born out of just having a jam and having a bit of fun, because I find the music itself is really it you know, it speaks to that. It's not traditional and it's really interesting. And I know you guys did some of the videos I was watching, you know, you had some costume sort of design involved and spoken word and didgeridoos and instruments. And it's really good to see, you know, hip hop outside of the box that sometimes it can be put in. I think, as you sort of touched on, in this day and age, the culture itself could probably use a lot of that at the moment and into the future. It sounds like it was just part of your personality mixed with theirs and Bubba's and Elf Transporters that just created that type of music? Or did you guys intentionally try and do something that was sort of unusual in a lot of ways?
Yeah, thanks for your feedback and take on that, because it's interesting. I haven't sort of thought about it too much lately. I don't think that as an artist, that if you try to do something intentionally, it's sort of like fake already. I think the real joy that you get even as a listener of an artist is when you get a sense that they're doing something which is true to them, which is really them. And that's probably what I will always value more than anything else, is that sense of, if I see you or hear someone, that's them. That's them. For all their quirkiness and weirdness and wrongness and maybe not technically perfectness or whatever, that is them. And you cannot take that away. And I think we sort of embraced our different backgrounds. Bubba comes from a very strong left-wing political street theatre background in his family, from the Living Theatre in New York. As I said, Elf comes from a very strong experimental electronic music and Indian music tradition, which you can hear in all his rapping, and he loves reggae. It's got a strong foundation. And for me, I come from a very strong theatre tradition and a drumming tradition, so that naturally all three of us were beatboxers. So those those elements all were just natural to what we were doing. And we've sort of, I guess, we're a bit fearless, and we definitely cop shit.
Really?
Yeah, come on, man. I mean, hip hop, when we were getting into it, there were many people in the scene who were just like, he's not rapping about graph or pulling bongs. What's that cunt? Things were pretty tough, when we were coming up. Stabbings at gigs, bashings at gigs were really not unusual at all. And we would always have women friends, some were partners, people such as Trey or Maya Jupiter, many others, Dana, who were regular contributors and to our live show, an important part of what we did. There was a woman, Keishi, who would come and do belly dancing with us when we would perform, at Kinsella's, and we would get we'd get dissed a lot for doing that kind of stuff. But when we got to New York in 97 and 98, people, all the Rocksteady crew and, Rock Raider, RIP, from, the Executioners and people like that, were sort of saw that we were very different. And I remember Fable saying, yo, to some guy, Fable from Rocksteady, he said, hey, I've got this cassette, these guys made a bass. You got to check it out. They've got a totally different sound, man. You can hear the sun in their music. And I was like, oh, beautiful, man. That's great, because New York is quite heavy and dark. And I think we did bring a certain element of sun and joy, which is something which is perhaps Australian, even though Bubba and Alpha are both originally from America. So, yeah, I think that's the gig in a way. What do you bring to the table? Because I'm not one of those rappers where I'm ever going to say I'm the best, because I know I'm not. I've been to New York. I know that I'm not even halfway to anything in any field. B-boy, beatboxer, producer, I just know the levels and the standards, but I know I love it and I want to keep doing it. So our lyrics were different as well. And yeah.
I think, if the goal in a lot of subcultures, but especially hip hop, is a lot of the guys that have been around, their goal is never to be the best. It's, it's, as it's about expression and bringing your own personality to the table. And if everyone just sounded the same, then it'd just be boring and no one would want to be a part of it. But you said you went to, you're in New York in 97 with those guys. Were you on a tour, or what was that about?
We ended up being there for about 7 or 8 months in 97, 98, 5 months and then 3 months, I think it was. And basically just we would do anywhere between probably 4 and 8 gigs a week. And sometimes we would sleep. And it was
what a time to be there, though. I mean, in those years, that's a crazy time to be in New York.
Yeah, well, your sense. So like we were lucky enough to see some people, do gigs with people who were coming up, like Talib Kweli and Mos Def and Mr. Man from the Bush Babies, or, you know, lucky enough to hang outside clubs and get Questlove chewing your ear off until I'm like, okay, man, I've got to go. You know, you're a lovely dude, but I'm tired. You know, it was a smaller scene, much smaller scene. You know, people like Mike Ladd and What Ocean, Pumpkinhead, the Lower East Side crew, those guys. New Rican Poets Cafe was our place, and eventually we were putting on nights there. And Wetlands, Weldon Irvine. It was a super pleasure to be able to hang out with that gentleman as a jazz elder who just started turning up to our gigs, and we're like, who is this guy? He's a 75-year-old dude, and he's like, do you have that song in Australia, When I Was a Sperm, I Had a Lot to Learn? I was like, yeah, we know that song. He said, you may have seen a clip. It's a young, muscly dude. And we said, yeah. He said, yeah, that's me rapping. That's my song. I'm like, what? So he's a jazz cat who taught Mos Def how to play keys. And he's works with Q-Tip and all the Native Tongue crew, and he's been sampled. And, he does what Umi says. He's taught Mos Def the keys on all that kind of stuff. And at the same time he's hanging out with them, he would come and hang out with us. And, people were just so open and welcoming. Rocksteady crew people as well, and B-boys and B-girls, and Rock Raider, R.I.P., such a lovely man. We got to hang out with him and jam with them, and we were going to record for the Executioners album.
Wow, really?
Yeah, which was amazing, but it just didn't work out in terms of scheduling. Kenny Muhammad ended up doing it, and was absolutely amazing. People just lovely, great, just couldn't say a bad word. So welcoming and so nice, and it was a bit hard coming back to Australia, because when we get back and people would still say, yeah, you're not a hip hop man. And we'd be like, oh yeah, okay, sure, no worries.
That must have been a little bit frustrating for sure, man.
Weird.
Yeah. Speaking of Australia and hip hop and the culture and things like that, I've read your paper. I'm not sure how old it is, the Hip Hop You Don't Stop paper that you wrote. It's really informative. It's a really interesting little piece. You touched on a few things in that. One of which was sort of just a brief outline of the history of hip hop, which I think is good for everyone, whether they're heavily involved or not, just to understand sort of the story of DJ Kool Herc and where he came from, and even though it's brief, it's quite informative, and it's good to know. I think a lot of people sort of overlook that stuff, where it came from and things like that. Another thing you touched on though is what you call the capitalist co-opting of hip hop culture, and that really sort of struck a chord with me, and I think it's a really interesting point. I guess what I want to ask you is, do you think hip hop's popularity has had some sort of a negative impact on the culture itself, moving in, 2020, 2021 and into the future? Where do you see the culture in Australia at the moment?
Awesome question. Thank you. I take two points out of what you're saying I'd like to touch on. One is the capitalist co-option of hip hop culture. And that's not Australian. That is KRS-One advertising, Sprite lemonade, and I love KRS-One. But there is an inherent hypocrisy or paradox within a lot of hip hop culture, which isn't based on the fact that it comes from a capitalist culture, which is based on a history of invasion and slave trade. And those three things create a lot of the worldview that is within hip hop, that does result in a large element of what from outside America can really be seen as materialism and bling and superficial, which is a different narrative coming from a slave history, which is America, which is Black music, which is what we are doing, which is what we are participating in and lucky to be part of, as people who are not Black, me in this instance. So the co-option of hip hop, I hate it, and I've hated it for a long time, but it's always there. And these days, if I could kill anyone involved with Red Bull, I'd kill them all. kill everyone involved with fucking Red Bull. That shit is the most vulture shit in the world. And I've done research, track down the history of Red Bull and what that is and how much money they make and what damage it does to young children's stomach lining and teeth, and how much they co-opt and do insider bullshit with our culture, and how people just suck on that dick. Sorry to be so blunt, but people do. And I just won't do it, you know. I have done things. I'm definitely not perfect, but I think Red Bull is a very good example of the co-option of hip hop. You know, it's become that hip hop hipster shit, you know, almost now, you know, Questlove, you know, Insider music camps and, you know, down with Anderson .Paak and Red Bull. And, you know, I mean, it just makes you want to puke, you know. Where's the punk? Where's the sort of stuff the system? Where's the question the system, you know? That's not there enough. So in terms of what's happening within Australia, I will say that the most exciting thing is indigenous hip hop. Full stop. That's it. You know, it's just because coming back when you go overseas and then you come back, you know, you're sort of coming back and you're thinking, what's unique about Australia? Because there are a lot of white boys like me around the world who are doing hip hop, b-boys in Europe or South Africa or America, wherever, who are doing hip hop, which is great. But when it comes to the rap element, storytelling, I think the indigenous side of it to Australia is just inherently vital, unique, and paramount for anyone involved in the scene, whether or not you're involved or connected to indigenous hip hop. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not listening to everyone that's coming up. And I love IndigiTube. That's my shit. I love that.
IndigiTube.
It's like it's a free website and a free app, and you can listen to every single Indigenous radio station in Australia. You can live stream podcasts, video clips, language, culture, and heaps of hip hop. So people like Barker and Dobby, who I think there's some of the stuff they're doing, I think is super exciting and mad. And the saying shit, you know, like I love hip hop where people are saying shit, name it, you know, get angry. It doesn't always have to be angry. It can be funny too, you know, but say something, come out and say something. Don't just try and do what's being done. And so I that's where I find myself most drawn to in terms of content. Within that, in Melbourne, I will definitely say there's an incredible, wonderful scene of freestyling and great hip hop bands and stuff going on. I've been out of Sydney for a while, but I know there was a lot. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. I just don't go near Triple J.
Yeah, totally. No, I would agree as well. There's, you know, I don't have a lot of time in my day, you know, with kids and stuff like that and different projects. So when I do decide to listen to something, I definitely need to make sure it's coming from a good place or somewhere that I'm genuinely interested from. So places like Triple J, and, you know, not throwing any shade on anyone that works there or anything, but yeah, you're right. There's a lot of places to go.
Yeah, hit your community radio stations and go to Mixcloud and listen to some good sets by some of the fantastic hip hop DJs and funk and soul DJs we have in this country. And then also I always think, you know, it's the graph, you know, there's always inspiring graph out there. That always inspires me no matter where I am. And then the B-boys and the B-girls always come out with some mad stuff with some great vitality in that scene as well. And beatboxing, you know, beatboxing in Australia has been really strong and great, you know, in all kinds of ways, from Tom Thumb down, you know, so, you know, to LC, you know, so I think there's a lot of different elements, a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, for sure, man. Speaking of Indigenous communities, you know, you've obviously done a lot of work in rural communities, recording songs and things like that, which I want to get into and I want to ask you about. But I think just touching on that, the culture itself, as we've sort of spoken about, can be very insular in ways, as you just mentioned. Something I notice when I look at sort of your body of work, so to speak, is that you're taking the culture into places where it otherwise might not exist. Has that always been something that you've put effort into? I mean, you've traveled extensively recording songs, and the All You Mob releases are fantastic. How did that come about for you? Where did that interest sort of start?
Thanks very much, man. You've really done your work, so that's great. I appreciate it. I fell into it really after I'd done that big hip opera project in Southwest Sydney in '95, which was a very large scale hip hop community arts project. Then I was contacted by a guy called Tony Collins, who was working for the ABC in Darwin. And he said, for NAIDOC week, I'd like to bring you and a couple of other people up to work in Alice Springs. And that was, when was that? 96 or 97? And so it was Brother Black and Monkey Mark from Southwest Syndicate and myself. I see these as parallel communities, and there are connections, and particularly a lot of the Anangu mob, a lot of the Pitjantjatjara and Urucha and Arunta mob that we would connect with in Alice. I remember speaking with one guy who had Eazy-E tattooed on one arm and Adidas logo tattooed on his other arm. I said, what does this mean to you? And he had a two-pack shirt. I said, what does this all mean to you? He said, look, whenever I see a black face on TV, that's me. Now I cannot relate to that. But for him, I totally, I can understand that and I get that. And it meant so much to him, and that was one of the first, if not the first, doesn't really matter, times that people had run hip hop workshops in Aboriginal communities. We went out to Titchikala community, and then we were working with kids from town camps in Alice Springs and around the area, and created a show, recorded songs. We worked at the Gap Youth Centre, where Reason has been working not so long ago with Ella Core from Melbourne. They've been running workshops there recently, which is great. And we did songs called Brown Skin Girl, and with some of these young indigenous, young Anangu women up there who did their first hip hop songs. Shout out to Monkey Mark from Southwest Syndicate for doing the production. So that was the first thing. And once that happened, it just was like wildfire, because there was just a total calling and a need for so many communities. We want to do this. And sort of was on the road for I sort of didn't really have a home for about 10 years.
Wow, really?
And pretty much, just sort of had a storage place, and would go back there and then crash at people's places, and have places I would rent that would be really crappy, and I'd stay there for a bit and then just keep traveling, just keep going. So I was very lucky to be able to do it. And it was just a calling. Hip hop called out to all these communities, and I was just really happy to go out there and connect. And you'd get out there and kids had learned every move from Beat Street, up in Arnhem Land, or wherever you might be, and it'd be, wow, that's fantastic, and it'd just be joyful. It's absolutely, and it would really remind me of why I was doing hip hop myself, and that would give me different lyrics to record. And I recorded one of my albums, Odyssey, in Numbawa community up in Arnhem Land. I stayed for an extra week so that I could record there, and that was a beautiful experience. I got to record with George Urambu from Warumpi Band, R.I.P. We did Black Fella, White Fella, legendary song. We did a rap song together with Wire as well, and recorded that in Darwin. And that was like recording with like AC Alone, who's a king, and that was great. And then recording with George Urambu is like, God. And it's music, it's hip hop. That's, it connects, and I was just happy to, I don't know, I don't want to sound wanky, but sometimes when you're doing that kind of work, you're sort of a bit of a servant. You're in service of the culture, you're in service of the community, and your job is just to be there, present, technically competent, respectful, have done some research, maybe learn a few words, and be aware of protocols, and be respectful, and just sit in a room with an elder and get them to tell you a story, and then make some music for that, and get them to tell their story in their language. Mardu Mob, I was Jigalong, where they made Rabbit Proof Fence. I was recording with the brother of one of the sisters of Rabbit Proof Fence. He sung me a whole beautiful song one day in the classroom, and it just almost make you want to cry. It was like blues, desert music. And I gave him this heavy sort of beat over it, and he just sung this mad song all in Mardu in his language.
That's incredible.
So
yeah.
It was beautiful, man. Such a blessing.
And so are you just turning up to towns and speaking with elders, sort of off of your own back? Is there any communication, is there any organizations involved? It might be a dumb question, but I'm just trying to figure out, you're just sort of driving out to the desert and just trying to find these communities, or is there some sort of connection beforehand?
It's a good question. No, it works in reverse. So basically, a community, normally a community worker, like someone at the council or the PCYC, someone who's working with the young people normally, it could be a school teacher, will identify, ask the kids, what do you want to do? We want to do some hip hop. Okay. Then they'll probably get on the net, or they'll speak to friends, or they'll go, oh yeah, I mean, the Wilcannia Mob track got me a bit of notoriety on airwaves. Yeah. And people then would just contact you. Hey, look, we're up in wherever we are. We're up in Derby in Western Australia, and we've got a group of young people here who'd love to do the track. And the same thing extends out. I was lucky enough to get to Tanzania and work with some street kids in Tanzania. The same sort of thing, Basically, the young people are working with someone. They say they want to do a hip hop album or hip hop recordings. I get contacted, and then they just figure out how to get funding, whether it's local, state, or federal, or a mixture of all. And quite often you're working with a health service, like in Wilcannia, you work with Marima Aboriginal Health Service, and you might do songs where you're encouraging healthy eating, or don't drink too much, that kind of stuff, mental health, that kind of stuff, and you go out and do your thing.
Yeah, man, that's I think it's really courageous to do that type of thing. Not that those areas are inherently dangerous for you or anything like that, but just to put yourself out there and get involved with these communities. I can't imagine that there's a lot of people in that position. I mean, you probably know most of them, but that are going out there and giving that type of thing a good crack. It's really impressive. What do you, when you're recording music with the young adults and the kids in these communities, what are you seeing in them? Obviously you're seeing a bit of interest, but are they excited? Are they happy to express? Are they sort of using it as to get something off their chest and things like that? What's the response from them?
Yeah, all of the above. Everything you said is right on. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, you'll often be with kids and there'll be, might be the tough kid or the noisy kid in the class or something, maybe at one of the schools I might have worked here in Cairns, and you put a mic in front of them and they suddenly go quiet. And then you look down and you can see that the toes are really tapping. And you look at the palm of their hand and they're really sweating. And you go, gotcha. Poor dude. And then I'll say, first time I recorded, I could barely speak. And they're like, really? I said, is this your first time recording? And they're like, yeah. So they were really nervous, and that's just, you just got to make them feel comfortable, and then let them give them their time. Also, not force them into speaking perfect or mainstream English. Particularly with Indigenous and refugee communities as well. I will encourage them to use bits of their language or their lingo or their slang. What do you say here? What's your expression? What's your turn of phrase? Because that's what's unique. There's one young disabled guy I worked with. He was not what they call non-verbal. He doesn't speak, but we still recorded him. And when I played and he made certain sounds, I played him the song and he made sounds, and I played it back to the class, and the teacher said, oh, that's Alex. Could identify him straight away, and that's his song. So there's no right or wrong, but it's sort of maybe going back to what we spoke about before. It's about them being them is the gig. And The only hurdle sometimes can be when kids are trying to be something that they're not. And that's when you have to sort of play bad cop and say, look, dude, you don't have an AK-47. You know, you're talking about, you know, picking up bitches. You got the bus here. You know, you live with your mum. I mean, really, dude.
Good advice for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. So, yes. But once you sort of just set it up in a different way, and it's great. It's great fun. I always learn a lot, because when you're working with the young people, I'll always make a point of getting them to play me what they're listening to, and that'll push my production in different directions. Not to totally mimic, but to be aware of, and also to reflect who they are, what they're into, and where they are a little bit, as opposed to being cookie cutter. Because I don't like it when community organisations go in with songs pre-made, and I'll go on the record for saying that there are hip hop organisations that I think do that, and they rock up to a community and say, here are 4 songs made by a producer in America, pick one to rap over. And for me, that is ass backwards. It's totally wrong.
Totally. It defeats the whole purpose, doesn't it?
Yeah, man. It's just, it makes my skin crawl, and it becomes cookie cutter. It needs to be a unique exchange and connection between peers that happens on their turf and their country. And you need to have your ears and your senses open as much as you can to try and bring the sound of that landscape and wherever it is into the song production. And if that just cannot happen if you've turned up with the track that's already made. Yeah, which I think you would see with someone like Exit and Mystery when they do their graph and they work in a community. I've been lucky to work with Snarl, KOC crew, Coffs Harbour. I've watched him rock up. You know, we work together in Bowraville, Gabangariland, Wise community, and he'll rock up and do a portrait of a baby, you know, who happens to be at the workshop in like half an hour in aerosol, and then give it to the parents, and you've never seen people more happy. And that's beautiful, and it's hip hop.
Definitely, man. He's an incredible artist, Snarl.
Absolutely, he's a king.
Iconic.
Yes.
Is it is there a lot of, you know, and you'll have to excuse me, I don't know a lot, you know, sort of regrettably, I don't know a lot about the Indigenous communities in Australia, and it's something that I have been looking into. You know, especially with this podcast as well, I'm looking to speak to some people involved in the arts in different communities and things like that. But is there a lot of assistance from a government level for these people out there in terms of creativity and arts and things like that? Is there programs in place aside from what you're doing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, in the scheme of things, personally, particularly since my daughter's like coming up to 5 years old, you know, I haven't really been on the road much, you know, and so I've been happy to be with her and my wife. And but there's lots of other people doing lots of other really great work in all sorts, and there's mixtures and connections between the worlds of hip hop and theatre and spoken word and circus and sport, all connecting and building in all different ways with Indigenous communities and lots of other communities. So it would be hard to generalise, but I'd say there's a lot going on, and there is funding, and a really great way to get a sense of the huge amount of stuff which is being produced. You know, people like what's his name, rapper Optimus from Downside. He does a lot of good community work over in Western Australia, and you'll see some of his clips will pop that he's been involved in. They'll pop up on IndigiTube as well. So if you want to get a good sense of, just go on IndigiTube and you can just watch heaps and heaps and heaps of clips of more recent Indigenous hip hop community projects, and it's really inspiring stuff.
Yeah, definitely, man. I'll have to check it out. It's good to hear that there's a lot sort of happening out there to get young people involved. That's good news.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's what it's about.
Definitely, man.
And the old people too.
Yeah, and the old people as well. Can't forget about them. You mentioned heading to East Africa and is it Tanzania? You pronounced it?
They say Tanzania.
Tanzania, sorry. How was that? I mean, I watched the video of you over there, man. That looked really crazy. Again, I think it's really courageous. You know, you might not think so, but to go out there and set up your gear and record, you know, to you it might not be a lot, but just looking at it, I was like, oh my God, my heart would be in my chest just being in such a strange environment, and just you just put yourself out there. You're so open and honest. What was that like over there?
Oh man, that was one of the best experiences of my life. And yeah, totally. It was just beautiful. It was great. A woman called Donna was married to a local fellow there, and she was a midwife. She's Australian, and she was a midwife, and she'd set up a little bit of a school, and she was employing young ex-street kids to be tour guides on Mount Kilimanjaro.
Okay.
Because there is an issue with street kids, and the impact of HIV in terms of families breaking up and stuff like that. So, and she basically, these guys, they call themselves Wayahudi family, the three guys, said to her they wanted to do an album. And Donna's brother, who lived in the Gold Coast, contacted me, and we just went back and forth. And I was over in the UK. Luckily, I was very fortunate to work with the legend MC Ty. We did a hip hop theatre show over there, RIP Ty. Miss him dearly. And I said, look, I'm going to be in London. If you can pay for my airfare from London down to Tanzania, and give me somewhere to stay and feed me, I'll do it, you know. And they said, so they made it happen. They did their own little fundraising to cover my airfare. And yeah, I went down. I was there for 3 weeks and greeted at the airport. They were jumping up and down. Welcome to Tanzania, Morganics. You know, we have 52 songs ready to record. We jumped in the van and flew across the Serengeti Plains, and they're just rapping and beatboxing in Swahili and English, and you couldn't be more welcomed or more safe. And food was fantastic. The vibe was electric. It was hard work, constant work. Got through a whole album in the 3 weeks, and the guys were incredibly astute and good, and I learned. Then we have verse 1, then we have a bridge, and then I said, what? He said, then we have the bridge, and then we have, I said, sorry, man, I just do hip hop. What's a bridge? Oh, right. He said, yeah. And so I had to extend my sort of musical, skill set. And I'd been in Brazil before, so I had all these samples of Brazilian percussion. So I brought them to the table. And so we mixed crazy, it's called baile funk, which is a style of sort of ghetto music from Rio, and I'd bought that on the streets in Rio, and so I was sampling elements of Brazilian percussion and baile funk electronic stuff, which is almost like Miami bass, and brought that to Tanzania. And then these guys brought their vibe. They have their own distinctive style. They're called bongo flavor, which is a massive scene in Kenya and Tanzania of local hip hop, and the hip hop scene there is like light years ahead of Australia. You know, everywhere you go to a nightclub and they have a whole room just playing bongo flavor. You're on the bus and they're playing bongo flavor. You turn on the TV, you're watching video clips of bongo flavor. It's just enormous over there. So we just tried to fit it. They played me stuff, I played them stuff, we went back and forth, and it was a really amazing experience to do a whole album with them and shoot one clip in a Maasai village, which is great.
Yeah, the track that has the video clip it was really good actually. I was listening to it the other day. Really, they did really well, as you said. It's a good result. What kind of stuff are you taking? You know, what did you take? You know, have you just got your laptop and a little USB mic, or have you got mixing boards and things like that? What are you traveling with, or what were you traveling with?
Yeah. I mean, it's changed over the years. I started with a Hockshot SM58 Shure mic, recording into a mini disc, and I had a looping pedal, and I would loop beatbox and sounds with people, and then I'd play it back to them and go, here, that's the rhythm. Okay, now I'm going to stop that, and now you can do your whole rap a cappella. And I'm going to record that to the mini disc, and then because I had to, would then go home and put the mini disc and record all that into a cracked version of Cubase on my mum's old computer. And edit it and have to resync everything. That's how I did the Downriver song. Was
Oh, really?
Mob. Yeah, and have to resync the rap and the beat. And that's, I've done recordings like that in Long Bay jail with fellas in there. They're like, you don't have a full system. Well, at that stage, I didn't have a multi-track. That's how it started.
MacGyver.
Yeah, it was basically making an album with a can of baked beans. So, yeah, and it hasn't changed. I mean, now it's headphones. Now I use a USB mic and a laptop and a microphone splitter, and I bring maybe 4 sets of headphones, and that's it. That's it, because my mic has got a line in, so I've recorded up at Garma Festival with didgeridoo yidiki players and a full like brass section and a bass player, and I can record all of that through the mic and then plug the bass into the line in, and he'll play. So that's all I need. I mean, it's so small now and quick too, most importantly, and it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, the gear's pretty good these days.
It's insane, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really
insane.
Cheap and easy to use, and
yeah, right on.
You don't need to be a full-on wizard anymore to get things going, so it's handy.
No, it looks like you've got a good rig there. What's that mic?
Yeah, this is it's just an Audio Technica USB mic. I think it was $300 for this and the little boom handle here. So yeah, super handy. You mentioned that you did some work in Long Bay Jail. Was that with some of the people that were incarcerated there?
Yeah. I was working about 6 weeks, a 6-week program with guys who were in there for the long runs.
Really?
Done long-term stuff, done things which resulted them being in there for a long time. Yeah.
Recording music.
Yeah. It was interesting. I did with some of the Polynesian guys, we did like the reggae songs.
Yeah.
There was one older Koori fella who I was lucky to work with, and I ended up just working with him one-on-one, and he just wanted to tell a story, so I just sort of made a soundscape, I think with beatboxing right there in the room, and then he just told a sort of story, almost a poem about when the black fellas saw the white fellas arrive, and recording that down in his cell in Long Bay was just him in the room was amazing.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was great, man. It was great. Jails, man. I mean, they're worlds. I've spent a lot of time working at Parkville in Melbourne, and they have the juvenile jail, and they have a really long history of hip hop at that juvenile jail. Everyone from Mantra, Elf Transporter, B-Girl Demolition, B-Boy Rich, B-Boy J from Wicked Force. Going way back and forward, have lineage of hip hop teaching young people at Parkville. And then you go to jams in Melbourne, and it wouldn't be too unusual for someone to rock up and jump up in the freestyle, and you'd be like, hey, you were in the workshop. Or they'd be like, I did a workshop with Elf Transporter, and so I'm up here. And the crowd would be like, yeah, cheering them. And, that's awesome. It's a really good connector, and it can help particularly in that transition out of lockup for young people to stay out.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely.
I'm working with a young fella at the moment who's had a sort of a rough trot and could go into lockup, and he's just sending me lyrics, and we're going back and forth. I help him set up a little studio for himself. They had funding for that, which is great, and he's been able to record and make his own beats and do his own thing, and being able to sort of, it's quite a therapeutic thing in terms of some of the trauma that he's experienced, to put it into his raps and get it out there. And good on him. It's great to see.
What is it about? I mean, it's really interesting just talking to you, hearing you sort of talk about all these different projects with different people. It sounds like you really value sort of giving other people a platform to express themselves, and it sounds like a lot of the people that you're involved with might find themselves in disadvantaged situations, or as you just mentioned, in jails or about potentially looking at jail terms. Do you think is it something about you that you value, giving those people a chance to express themselves? Do you think that music is important for their lives? What is it about you that drives you towards those sort of, you know, the communities that you're working in, traveling overseas to these places that I'm sure a lot of people would never even consider taking their craft out there? Do you find it valuable for yourself as well as them?
Yeah, really spot on question. In a word, yes. I would say that my self-definition, my definition of who I am as a human and thus as a hip-hop artist, has been enriched by my privileged exposure directly to diverse range of communities, people, and landscapes. You know, it's amazing. It's been, you know, some of the places I've been, of course, I would never think that they even exist or be aware where they are on the map until I've gotten there. Then, you know, the way I look at a map of Australia would be different to someone else, like a truckie. They will have a different route, but I have a different route. You know, everyone is, if you travel for your work. And so, yeah, no, man, it's amazing. I mean, being able to travel for your work is as good as it gets, I reckon. Which is tough in a pandemic. Very, very, very tough. Because I think it's such a great thing about travel in any field. If you're an engineer and you travel for your work, if you're a scientist or, you know, school teacher, whatever, you're in it, and it's going to change you. It's always going to change you.
Definitely, man. Yeah. Do you think, you know, as a performer and an artist, was there a lot of challenges in sort of monetizing? You know, you just mentioned traveling for work and things like that. Was there times in your life where, you know, you were doubting whether or not you could survive off your creative talents, or was it just something that you always knew that you would do?
I've been really fortunate in terms of money hasn't been a problem, because...
And not to get, you know, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my purpose of that question, I'm not trying to get personal in terms of financials, but I'm interested if there was times in your life where, you know, maybe you were frustrated that you were trying to make something out of your talents, and obviously you've got so many, but just that transition period, you know, maybe when you're a young adult moving into the later years and everything like that, how frustrating it can be for artists to try and figure out a way through the maze of actually putting food on the table from their creativity. Was that ever an issue for you?
Again, a top question. I can relate to it, but I would say that because I come from two traditions, theatre and hip hop, I've always been able to do different things, and I've tried to learn and teach myself new things as I go as well. Within that, I know that, you know, I'm limited in a certain range, and, you know, I can only do things to a certain degree. But within that, it means that I've been able to adapt to working with, like, for example, a contemporary dance company in Berlin, where they might get me to come in and do beatboxing and popping and stuff with them, at the same time as I might get invited to help form a disabled hip hop crew in Sydney, First Flight Crew. And with the First Flight Crew, I have to bring in the skills of being able to record, produce, choreograph, and create a show, whilst working and being sensitive to a diverse range of people who have disabilities. And so I haven't been afraid to get my hands dirty and try different things, I guess, but also try to bring as many skills to the table as I can, from, you know, elements of capoeira to acrobatics to, you know, theatre, poetry. It's all the skills. The more skills you can bring to the table. Someone like Mystery, you know, not only is a graph artist, but he's a dope rhymer, you know, of course. And Exit is not only a super amazing graph artist, but he's a killer b-boy and a magazine publisher an editor, and the things that you've learned in just going through the mechanics of doing that. Same thing, having made the film, it meant after I made Survival Tactics, whenever I go back to a community to shoot a clip, I had more ideas and, you know, maybe a few more suggestions or skills perhaps to bring to the table. And I think that's what you've got to do, is you've got to bring as much to the table as you can. And also, I don't really need money. I don't give a shit about money. I just need to have a roof and food, and I can live on hardly anything, and I often have. My tax accountant normally goes, what? But, you know, which is good until you have a kid. And so now I'm doing my master's to be a high school teacher, because it's just the game changes when you've got a kid, and I need to have enough money to provide for her and for my wife, you know, collectively. So I've had to, you know, bite that bullet and you know, sort of bring things a bit to a halt in order to do something else. Like a lot of people in the world today.
So, I think adaptation is a good thing for everyone.
Sure. But don't do anything artistic for the money or fame, because, you know, it's not, just forget that. Like, I know hear kids talking about getting signed or making millions or whatever, things like that. I'm just like, dude, just forget about it. Just like, you want to be thinking a combination of, like, you're just so into it, you're just doing it.
Yeah, for sure. You got to be passionate about it.
You know, you've been there, you know that, you know, you're just so into it, you're just doing it because you're doing it. You're ciphering because you're ciphering. And if you stop ciphering and you don't want to cipher, you should probably quit, you know, if you're an MC. Do you know what I mean? You've got to keep that love for it. I think KRS says that, don't, you know, keep it as a hobby, to keep it pure.
For sure, man. That's a really good point. I find as soon as you start focusing on anything else, your creativity kind of just hits a wall in a lot of ways. But obviously, you know, a lot of people have made careers out of their art too, and that's great. You know, that's a beautiful thing to see. I think there's a balance there somewhere, and it's a tricky thing, and it's really interesting to me to talk to people that have made a life out of you know, their passion and their art, and I imagine it would be a really difficult thing to do, and a lot of bumps along the way. You mentioned your theatre background. Did you grow up in a sort of theatrical household? Where did that sort of come into your life?
It's a bit of a crazy household, but I don't know if it was theatrical.
Do you have formal training in that type of thing?
Yeah, I remember when I went to the Royal Easter Show with my parents when I was 11, and I came across a stand for a place called the Australian Theatre for Young People. And they said, we train you to be an actor. And I think I may have mentioned at a certain stage I wanted to be Charlie Chaplin. I love Charlie Chaplin. And I said, can I go here? I could learn to be Charlie Chaplin. And they said, yeah, sure. So my mum is a book editor, and she used to edit Choice magazine. And my dad is a lecturer in communications.
Interesting.
Yeah, so nothing theatrical or musical at all. But so yeah, I would not in any way say that they pushed me into it. It was more like, yeah, you can do it, go
for it.
And I come back, and how was it? It's awesome, great. And I just kept doing it. So I did plays from when I was 11, and I got to work with a lot of really great industry level directors and actors of all different ages. I did a play about a street kid when I was 11, and that was all set in the cross, and it was heavy as anything. And the other actors in that, and some of the people, you know, like some of the people from our people above me were like Nicole Kidman, people who I did plays with, people like Tony Collette, you know. Some of the people around us got really famous and did really well, and that's great. But most importantly, it gave me a real respect for the hard work that is needed in the creative process and the discipline required to be a working artist. That's what it instilled in me. Some of my directors were really hard on me at the age of 14. They'd bust you, yell at you if you yawn. and turned up to a country practice set acting when I was like 15, and the actors all sort of rolled in like 20 minutes late and didn't know their lines. And I came back to my theatre director and I said, "Oh, they were amateurs.
I can't work under these conditions.
This is terrible." I was there half an hour early, had all my lines down, and
And so you should. I think that's a good point. A lot of creatives could take that on board. Discipline, very, very handy.
Yeah, it's been a great friend. Yeah,
definitely. Do you get nervous? Do you still get nervous when obviously there's not a lot happening at the moment with the pandemic and things like that, but when you perform, does it still do you get the butterflies in your stomach and things like that?
Yeah, sure. I think if you stop getting nervous again, you should probably quit. It's sort of over. That's one thing definitely about theatre, is that there's so many moving parts involved that, if you feel as if you've actually got the show right one night, you've got it all right, then quit, because that's never going to happen again. Because you didn't. Because it can always be better. And I think these days, and I've spoken with Elf Transporter about this, as people who are a bit older in the field of hip hop, with the online world, it can. I think everyone struggles with it, but particularly for those of us who came up under a time before the internet, where you had to earn your stripes by going to a lot of gigs, finding records, finding equipment, all that kind of stuff. As you said, equipment is cheap now. Everyone's online. It's all accessible. Everything's there. If you're lucky, you do one little clip and it blows up, or perhaps you just do bedroom gigs for your whole life, your whole career, which might be last 3 months, and you blow up. Particularly for like me and Elf, we were talking about, like, it's really hard to sort of equate worth or weight to online content, and the sort of seeing it as something worthwhile. And I have unattended my social media for the last year, I think, because I've got sick of curating and being aware that I was curating what is really a bit of an illusion. Of course it is an illusion of, it's what I choose to present to the world. And so it's been good to step back from that. And I've really enjoyed not being on Facebook and Instagram much at all. I find it much better mentally. Means if I do see someone, I can actually say to them, "Hey, what have you been up to?"
and not already know exactly what they've been up to.
Yeah, exactly. It's made the world so weird. So I can ring someone and say, how are you going? And I don't know the answer, So that's been good. But so the connection to your question is that I think perhaps Elf and I were saying that we get nervous about putting stuff online because we're aware of how easy it is for things to be dissed or forgotten or thrown away. And everybody who puts anything online, it still takes a lot of effort. Like you doing this podcast, it takes so much, hard work, to make it happen. And then you just think, oh my God, I'll put it out there, and how much else is out there? And someone will just say a one-word comment and, and that can be really, which is different to a live setting. In a live setting, there's a bit more push and pull. It's not as permanent, and not everyone sees it if you fuck up,
Definitely, man. It's got a different energy for sure. Does it, as a performer, and I've seen you perform, you really captivate a crowd, and you understand what needs to take place to have people listen. And I assume that comes from just your background in theatre and things like that. But is it worrying to you, sort of the landscape of all this online things and everything like that for the years ahead, in terms of people that are looking to perform live and things like that? I often get worried about how the world's going to look, after this pandemic, for things like that, and how much longer is it going to continue? I assume that it will continue in some form or another, but I've got a close eye on, you know, the online world, and I think live performances are really important, and live art are so important, and I hope that, you know, things flourish in that regard. Do you think about that at all? Are you worried about where that's sort of headed?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because most of my friends for my whole life are artists of different sorts, but we've all been affected, and everyone's been affected. In, you know, dancers who've been dedicated their whole life to dancing from the age of 8, and for the past 2 years, that's it. That's it, and it's probably over. It's probably, you know, like in terms of sustainability, because that's all an artist wants. You just want to sustain. No one's in there to think they want to make money or really be famous if you're in it for the long haul. You just want to sustain, but it's unsustainable. And it was going that way anyway, don't you reckon, Jack? It was like before COVID hit, things were going online, and artists, the double-edged sword was that an artist who was from nowhere could blow up. You know, an artist who, double-edged sword was that an artist who didn't know anything about the lineage of the form that they were into could blow up. And did. And has, through time, done that. We've seen many. And that was disconcerting, whereas there was a time when you had to earn your stripes, going to things and, you know, rubbing shoulders in a sweaty room, turning up late at night, finding the venue, you know, all the crazy, and the meetings of minds and people and all that. And I feel so sorry for people, particularly at pivotal, you know, formative stages of their lives. Like, I'm thinking when you finish high school, for the first, you know, next 7 years, really, you're inventing yourself and you're opening yourself up to all sorts of mischief and, you know, craziness and experimentation. And after that sort of period, you become a different person, and people aren't getting that, man, you know. And I really feel sorry for them in terms of not having those random alleyway conversations that crack their head open to them going, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to quit accounting, I'm going to be a community nurse. Or whatever, you know what I mean? The randomness of life, which is, you know, also magic. There's an element of magic which we miss. So it's a grief for everyone, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I would yeah, I totally agree, man. The randomness of life. It's one of my favorite things, you know, going to an event or just meeting someone, and just it creates a little bit of spark in you, and you think, oh, I could do this, or wow, that's a really good idea. And you might go down a whole nother path. And I do worry, you know, I mean, there's not, what more can you say other than, you know, just watch this space. But I do worry about artists, not just with the pandemic, as you said, before the pandemic, even, it was sort of everything's going online. And I just really value, you know, especially young people and their creativity, and as they find their feet, I think they're so valuable for the world. So I just really hope that, you know, they can come out the other end of this and have a place to create and dance. And, well, as you said, you know, community nurses, social workers, all these types of things that generally, you know, you don't make $1 million off, but there's, you know, some of the most important crafts for people to get involved in. So as I said, you know, I got a keen eye on it, and I guess it's kind of a case of, we'll just see what happens. What have you been working on lately? Speaking of being creative and things like that, you've been checking out your website. You've got a bunch of music, man. You always staying active, and you got a lot of drive, brother. I think a lot of people could take a page out of that book. But have you been working on any music lately?
Yeah, last year I did an EP with the local producer here called Develop. And that was a great experience. It was just called Old Beats, New Rhymes, because he had a bunch of old beats and I had a bunch of new rhymes. And we didn't really know each other that well, but we sat down one day, and I'm sure you've done it too, and he busted out his MPC and played up his beats, and I pulled out my rhyme book and played mixed and match one afternoon and said, damn, let's do it. So I just did that, and that was really great, reasonably quick project to do. And most recently I've just finished, it's like an EP. I'm feeling like 20 minutes is a good length these days, 7 tracks. It's called Dusty Gems. And it's bunch of tracks from over the years, which are sort of like almost ones which I thought sort of maybe was too conservative to release in terms of, I don't know, like there's one track which is like almost like a full-on electro bass music house tune, which is not what you would expect from Morganics. But for me, it's still got this hip hop underpinning, but it's got no lyric, no rap on it. Like that's the last track on it. The second last is a jungle remix of a track I did with the MC Jamalski from New York. Music is My Revolution. So I did, that was like a hip hop ragamuffin tune originally, and I've done a jungle style remix, and that is, I mean, it's banging, it's crazy. And so that's fun to put on. And I've done another one with Taki Khan, who's an Afghan singer who I worked with, Hazara, member of the Hazara community in Melbourne, and Tumi the Bee, who's a rapper in Melbourne, originally from Botswana. So we did this sort of sci-fi African, Afghanistan, Australian track. That was a really cool thing, which I just thought was too out there to release. But I thought, no, fuck it. At this day and age, I'm sort of like, just throw out the crazy shit, you know, a little bit, you know what I mean? So, and then the crazy new track is, it's called Love Against Hate. And it's about what's going on online. And the chorus is lobotomize, regurgitate, don't question, no room for debate. Online tribalism, separating people, but we gotta bring love against hate.
Fuck yeah, man.
It's really my feel.
Very good
it's
message.
really my feeling. Thank you, thanks.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much whack shit.
Totally.
And there's just so much division. And so I just went to town on that one. And the beat is like, it makes me think of like some early Ice-T shit. I got a bit gangster on it, you know. Yeah, just sort of fuck this and go hard on the 808 and
bit of attitude.
Yeah, a bit of attitude on it. And I've done a clip for it, which is I did all on my phone. So it's at text messages with GIFs, because I love GIFs. They're really fun. So the whole thing is just a series of crazy GIFs which fit with the lyrics. And then I've got this other app. And so the idea is that the whole phone is just a vertical video, like on your phone, like an Instagram story, as if you're sort of trapped in your phone, because that's sort of what it's about, you know? So I sort of like, that took me back to my art school days a little bit. You get like, trying to push the idea, trying to challenge myself to visually interpret what I'm trying to say, and also trying to articulate to myself what am I trying to say. So that was good therapy.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the times, that's what music is, isn't it? Good therapy.
Word. Yes. Yeah, I figured out how to, you know, on your iPhone, how you can actually make a video of everything that happens on your screen in real time.
Screen record, yeah, for sure.
Screen record, bro.
That's handy, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, dude. It's this like really scary option. The possibilities there, but it's really good for this, because then I play the song in my studio, and then I operate the texts and move it around, and it's really fitted the thing. And so yeah, it's just finished, and that should be out. What is it now? It's end of September, so it should be out in October.
Beautiful, man. And that'll be available on YouTube and on your website and things like that?
Yeah. You just Google Morganics and you'll find it, on my website, and it'll turn up on Apple Music and Spotify to make sure that I get paid 1 cent and all that.
That's cool, man. Well, I look forward to it. As soon as it's out, let me know, man, and I'll chuck up links and everything like that on my socials and see if we can get some people listening to it too.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
Well, listen, man, you know, we've almost been speaking close to 2 hours now, so I really appreciate your time, man. As I said earlier, it's a real treat to talk to you. I've always been interested in what you're doing, because I always knew that you were just really embraced hip hop, and I knew that you had this whole other history in terms of theater and music production, and you know, there's a lot that I can't get to now just because of time and things like that. But you know, I can't thank you enough for your time, and I think what you've done is really impressive, man. You should be proud of all the different communities that you've been in touch with and all the different songs that you've recorded. I think it's a credit to your passion and your drive, and I hope to see a lot more from you in the future, man.
Very kind words. Thank you very much for taking the time and doing your research, and excellent questions. Some of the best I've ever had.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I am just getting used to this format. I'm not particularly great at conversation. It's actually a hard skill. Like I found doing doing this with people, it's you think, oh, I can just have a chat to someone for a little while. I'm kind of talkative, but it is pretty hard to get the message across and to ask the right thing. So I do appreciate that, but I am still working on it too. One thing I'm finding, speaking to some of the guys like yourself that have been around, before my time, is that a lot of you guys, as I said earlier, there's something about giving back to the culture that I find is really important. And I'm not sure what it is. I think it might come with age or something, but there seems to be a drive to give back to people and, to get more of a selfless approach. And I think that's really interesting in hip hop, because a lot of hip hop for me is selfish. A lot of the things that I've done in the past have been about me, and I want to write what I think. And so to see you guys give back to all these communities and help people out and do workshops, I think it's so important. And I hope that continues on with the next generation and the one after that, and so on and so forth.
I think it's one good point. I'd say that part of the reason is people like Latifah and Chuck D, and KRS, anyone who came up around them at that time, and if you were vaguely aware of them, that kind of stuff, it was sort of like a responsibility was put onto you, a respect for the art form. And then it became commodified, and it became, oh, fucking anyone can do it. I can do it. Fuck it, And as opposed to like a Gil Scott Heron, which is, my shit sort of thing, like Gil Scott, like respect the microphone, respect the crowd, respect the art, respect, the topic, all that. But there's no, in the mainstream, you're not hearing that for a long time, since 2000 probably, So it's understandable that then people are like, back to that materialistic sort of post-slave thing, I'm going to get mine, which is a different narrative.
Yeah, I think it's so important, man. That's such a good message. And it's definitely something that I've noticed. Some of the guys from the early days, they try and pass that message out so it continues. Before I let you go, man, where can people, do you want to just tell us where we can find you online?
Yeah, sure. The easy way to find me is just Google Morganics, Morganics. My website is morganics.info. I've got a YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and type in Morganics, and you'll find me on all the streaming platforms, I think, too. So I can, pay for 1/28 of one cup of coffee.
Yeah. Pay for the first sip.
Yeah, that's it. And give the rest back.
Yeah.
Sorry, right, I got my order wrong. I couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
I'm a musician.
Get the musician cup that's about this big.
The musician cup.
Well, I encourage everyone to check out Survival Tactics on YouTube. Anyone listening that wants to head over to YouTube, go and check the movie out. It's fantastic. And again, Morgan, I really thank you for your time, man. Hopefully we cross paths in the future when the restrictions end and we can come hang out in person.
Look forward to it.
Thank you for listening to the Lead Poison Podcast.